I hope you are doing well and your loved ones are well and you are all finding ways to not lose your minds and also keep your personal economies flowing. I was thinking this morning, wouldn't it be amazing if a lot moved online so that we had fewer buildings and more green space? Or add to that, if there was a huge public works program that led to a ton of jobs where people were helping to refine the health of the native forests and our natural lands, as well as green the urban core so that our cities were healthier for everyone.
Exit right.
So, with that being said, I'm off to do some pruning, clean up from damage, but on healthy trees, which made me think about the fact that I haven't done a video yet on why pruning is so important to train your trees. And thank you, International Society of Arboriculture, for your recent webinar on some of the mechanics, the physics and mechanics of how to prune properly, when to prune, how to identify ratios for this thing called bark inclusion. So this thing called bark inclusion happens a lot when you have two headers on your tree. So instead of one header, so one lead, one primary dominant spire on the tree, you have two. So this happens a lot in urban landscapes. It can happen in the forest too, but it's typically a response to the fact that there's just not a lot of natural shedding because there isn't a lot of competition for light in urban landscapes, and so trees can produce these lateral branches and feed them, which can cause long-term problems. The reason that is because the bark that develops around a tree, as you're well aware, is a protective coating. What you may not be aware of is that it's also very close to primary vascular tissue that's critical to not only
In a quarter of a mile. Exit right.
feeding that bark or feeding those cells around that layer so that it can make a nice thick bark, but also vascular tissue that's critically important to maintaining the structural integrity of the tree. I tell my students the bark is like the bones, or the vascular tissue is like the bones of the tree. Alright, so healthy vascular tissue
And then keep left.
is very important. Alright, so when you get this thing called included bark, what you'll see a lot of times at the intersect right there, where there's two headers or two very close, things are falling over, but luckily they're sealed, joints or branches join, and they can be the two competing headers, or they can be a branch angle that's very tight. And I'll tell you about the exceptions in a minute. Alright, the bark actually grows as though those two branches, it's almost as though those two branches were separate trees. And so the vascular tissue becomes discontinuous, it becomes separated. And so instead of having a nicely joined angle where that vascular tissue, those bones, are strong and the bark is strong and they can support the weight of that branch, you have bark that actually cuts off the vascular tissue and makes it so that those two branches, when hit with a storm, one of them is likely to break. Alright, it depends upon where the tree is planted, how much protection it has from wind, and how those branches are angled towards the wind, as well as the type of tree, as to the probability of breakage, right? Health, species of tree, its exposure to wind, its exposure to prevailing wind during heavy storms, its exposure to heavy storms. With increasing frequency of heavy storms, I think we're going to see a lot more breakage. So you can prune your trees to when they're young, and even when they're older, but especially when they're young, when you've got new saplings going in right now, you can prune those very conservatively in a way to make sure that they have only one header, okay? And that will make for a healthier tree overall and one that costs you less money. on my blog at www.betternature.solutions. And if you don't put the www in, like some HTTPs, you can not put that in, you're fine. With mine, you've got to put it in. If you go there, I have a blog, and on that blog I have how to prune, and it's got a link to some websites that are very good for providing you some pruning information, like 45-degree angles, how to get close to the wound tissue that will help create a healing, protective bark over that wound that you've created. And so that's the important thing about keeping your trees pruned, to keep them healthy and resilient in a storm, so there's enough airflow going through that canopy. Because if that canopy is really thick and dense, it's like a sail in the wind and it will break. And so with the storms last night in Tennessee, that's what happened a lot. And we've all seen over the last, I don't know, some for longer. I've only been in Tennessee for
Exit right.
4 to 5 years, and so you've been there for decades. You're telling me the storms are definitely, there's always been a few bad storms, but the frequency of bad storms has increased. And that is totally what is predicted as a result of climate change, that you will have increased frequency of bad storms. And so I fear this is the new norm. All right, so we can make our trees a little bit healthier. Now, some trees, like the Bradford pear, which is another reason why it's such a weak tree, I think I got off too soon, is you'll see that it just sort of branches, these big branches. And I definitely did not keep left. She told me that after the fact. Those big, thick branches all sprouting from a central point, that makes for perfect opportunities for breakage. That and the fact that it grows so fast is why you get
Keep left.
a very dirty tree. Dirty meaning lots of limb fall and lots of damage to the tree, and they end up looking terrible. The pin oaks tend to have very tight angles, and that is just the way those grow. So keeping the canopy thin on those pin oaks, their angles won't be that perfect. Oh, this is not a left turn. Keeping those angles at what is suggested in a lot of the online stuff that I have available presently, you can't do that with pin oaks. So basically you just got to keep the canopy thin so you get that airflow. That airflow is not only good for stabilizing the structure, the architecture of the tree, and making
In 0.1
tree
mile. Keep left.
and making sure it's healthy, but also in increased airflow means, as I think I said in a previous video, decreased accumulation of pathogens like fungi and microbes, because they like moist, dark
In
habitats.
0.1 mile. Turn left.
Yeah, I can't turn left, huh? This is the wrong way. I clearly have done the wrong way. Alright, I'm glad you guys are getting, hopefully you're entertained by my inability to navigate with my Waze app. Alright, hopefully this has been useful. If you have any questions, please contact me. If you have any suggestions for blog posts, I am happy to put those up. Thanks a lot.